Humanity still has many unsolved mysteries. What existed before the Big Bang, what happens after death, who killed Kennedy, and why Russia is still a member
of the United Nations.
Mordor has violated all the existing laws of this organization, which, let us recall, was created to ensure peace on Earth. But the country that started an aggressive war of conquest is not only not expelled, but actually has veto power in the UN.
What the hell is that about?
This literally discredits the United Nations and renders its existence pointless. And what's more, Russia is not just waging war, but committing war crimes. And since Moscow is a permanent member of the Security Council, it is essentially committing war crimes under the auspices of the UN. Moreover, the Kremlin uses the organization as a platform to broadcast propaganda and incite hatred. It is from the UN podium that the world regularly hears about combat mosquitoes and European Nazis who supposedly dream of capturing Syzran.
So I asked the question, doesn't the Security Council have anything better to do? We've been listening to this for a long time now. Statements from the Russian Federation, but once again today, Mr. Eba, the rapporteur, confirmed that there is no evidence or substantiation for these statements from Russia. I'm curious, how would these mosquitoes even distinguish between Russians and Ukrainians?
The most humiliating thing for the UN is that its agencies regularly document Russia's crimes, but can't do anything about them. For example, a United Nations commission has established that Russia systematically strikes peaceful cities, carries out deportations of the population, repression, and the abduction of children. Thousands of irrefutable pieces of evidence of crimes against humanity have been collected. But the Russian delegation, hiding behind a senseless charter, vetoes every attempt to condemn it.
We all see that the Security Council is paralyzed because of the constant involvement of the Russian Federation. This is the button, the specific control that truly and effectively blocks all decisions to stop the Russian invasion.
For example, the UN Independent Commission has stated that Russia systematically and deliberately strikes residential buildings to force civilians to leave their homes and flee from territories controlled by Ukraine. And there is zero response. Even though the occupiers themselves admit to these crimes and even boast about them.
So now at last we've started to wipe them out to hell. There will be no life in Kharkiv, nor in Poltava, nor in Mykolaiv, nor in Odessa. These cities will not exist. Kyiv will not exist. If the civilians don't realize it, that they've been chosen as expendable and don't overthrow their Nazi government, no strength to do it, at least leave those cities.
The UN is well aware that real terror is taking place in the occupied territories, and you can see it on Russian federal channels. They literally show deportations, looting, and the oppression of the captured population live on air.
We have a whole range of mechanisms in place. For example, if before the new year a person could still receive medical care with a Ukrainian passport, such a decision was made, then after the new year, they will no longer receive it. I think this is perhaps a rather harsh measure, but in general, that's just one measure I've mentioned. In reality, we have a very large set of such measures.
Hans. So are we villains?
Russia at the UN is like if Hitler had come to the anti-Hitler coalition summit and vetoed Lend-Lease, and then proudly talked about how successfully the SS was carrying out population purges and how many concentration camps they built in a year. The main thing is there is no clear or adequate justification for any of this, for the fact that Russia still hasn't been expelled from the UN, or at least stripped of its rights, its voting rights. Here's an example of the schizophrenia happening within the organization. In 2022, at a UN Security Council meeting, there was an attempt to condemn the illegal referendums on the annexation of Ukrainian territories to the Russian Federation. But Russia vetoed the collective decision. In other words, the criminal let itself off the hook. And the UN effectively approved the military seizure of a sovereign state's territory.
In fact, the Russian Federation is discrediting the work of such an important body as the Security Council, which is responsible for issues of peace and maintaining security around the world. The Russian Federation is, in fact, actually the primary violator of all United Nations rules and its charter, having started the largest war since World War II.
The issue of UN reform has been raised since 2014, when Mordor annexed Crimea and unleashed carnage in eastern Ukraine. At that time, Moscow blocked the deployment of a UN peacekeeping contingent in Donbass, and on February 25, 2022, it vetoed a Security Council resolution to end the invasion of Ukraine. Moscow couldn't care less about the UN General Assembly resolution in which 141 countries condemned Russia's aggression.
There are, let's say, imperfect mechanisms within the United Nations, but nothing is moving forward, and let's say there is no progress happening at all. And for things to change, courageous and bold, as well as radical political decisions, first and foremost, need to be made.
The issue of expelling Russia has been raised repeatedly, not only by Ukraine, but also by other countries. But the principle of injustice is embedded in the very foundation of the UN. It is impossible to punish a permanent member of the Security Council there. First of all, the UN Charter does not state that violating the Charter is grounds for expulsion, which is, in itself, absurd.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I've ever heard. Erwin, everyone in this room has become significantly less intelligent.
Secondly, there is essentially no mechanism for expelling an aggressor from the UN. To initiate such a process, the organization's charter would have to be rewritten. For that, 2/3 of the countries would need to support it at the General Assembly. And then this decision must be approved by the Security Council, where Russia has the right to veto. It's a vicious circle.
It's truly an absolute disgrace, in my opinion.
But the most interesting thing is that Russia doesn't even need to be expelled from the UN, because legally it isn't a member. Moscow is illegally present in the United Nations, and even more so in the Security Council.
Participants in a video conference held under the auspices of the Atlantic Council in Washington pointed out that the automatic replacement of the Soviet Union by the Russian Federation in the UN Security Council was not legal.
Now that's a twist.
Russia obtained its seat in the Security Council solely thanks to a large-scale scheme. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Yeltsin simply wrote a letter to the UN and declared that Russia was taking the USSR's place. They just changed the nameplates and that was it.
Wait, was that even allowed?
Of course, just changing the nameplates doesn't make you a member of the United Nations. There's a mandatory procedure you have to go through for that. And the Russian Federation never did that, to this day. The Russian Federation is still not mentioned in the organization's foundational documents. This is a complete violation of the UN Charter. In order to take the Soviet Union's seat on the Security Council, the Russian Federation first had to become a member of the UN.
The original requirements for countries to be admitted to the UN were participation in the 1945 San Francisco Conference, where the UN Charter was adopted, or signing the Declaration by United Nations on January 1, 1942. Plus signing the UN Charter and its ratification in accordance with Article 110. Experts note that Russia did not fulfill any of these requirements.
Not only did Russia not sign anything, it didn't even submit an application for membership. As a result, there are some unclear people from a non-existent country sitting on the Security Council, a country that hasn't even ratified the very UN Charter itself.
It's just nonsense. Nonsense!
The presence of Russian representatives at the UN is offensive and discriminatory to other countries. For example, after the collapse of Czechoslovakia, both the Czech Republic and Slovakia went through the membership procedure separately. The same was done by the countries of the former Yugoslavia and Sudan. The only state that did not do this was the Russian Federation. It is not in the UN, which means its representatives should vacate the premises as outsiders.
Russia obtained its membership in the Security Council absolutely illegally. Without delving into the history and events surrounding the Alma-Ata Conference in December 1991, Any lawyer from any country in the world can confirm that the signing of this agreement did not comply with the UN Charter, nor with the rules and principles of international law. That's why I support the idea of applying purely legal norms to resolve this issue. The Chinese option has a decent chance, but in that case, Ukraine should immediately submit an application for membership in the Security Council in place of Russia.
There are no grounds to consider the Russian Federation a member of the UN, let alone a permanent member of the Security Council. Because throughout history, not a single state has become a member of the UN without following the procedure for admission stipulated by the UN Charter. And that means
What is dead, after all, may never die.
there is no need to expel Russia from the UN. It should simply be ignored, as if it doesn't exist. And the right to vote as a permanent member of the Security Council should be given to Ukraine. As one of the founders of the UN, and as one of the legal successors of the USSR, which at the time of its collapse possessed the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world, it is time to restore justice and return legitimacy to the UN, which it has lost. As long as the Security Council includes Russia. In this seat on the Security Council, which Russia occupies illegally due to behind-the-scenes manipulations after the collapse of the Soviet Union, sit liars whose job is to justify the aggression and genocide carried out by Russia. And all actions of the UN, both the Security Council and the General Assembly, that could have stopped this aggression, are thwarted by the privilege that this seat grants to the aggressor. The seat is given to the aggressor.
I would like to remind you that this video is created for entertainment purposes and contains elements of satire and irony. All facts and events are presented in a hyperbolized or exaggerated form to convey a comedic or dramatic effect. Our goal is not to mislead, but to highlight humor. Please take it with a smile.